2 minutes. I'm like, where these people get these sounds? They got horns.
Some people are just standing outside, like banging pans together.
It feels like a Caribbean graduation. Okay, let me mute this.
Listen, it really does.
Okay. I love it.
Last night apparently they were playing. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go, please.
No, I was just saying last night they were playing, all the musicians in New York City were playing on their balconies for the doctors and the healthcare workers and stuff. It's nice.
Nice.
Yeah, I love that. I can. And encourage everyone in our chat to let us know if at any point the audio wavers in any way, shape, or form. We are broadcasting live through YouTube, and I'm also on Instagram Live. What was that? Okay.
Either firecrackers or gunshots, I don't know. In the Bronx, you never know. You never know in the Bronx. So we don't.
How about that? So let's do this. I have a question about how that both makes you all feel, given that you're on the front line. But before we do this, we have 1 minute. Why don't we use it to acknowledge a moment of silence for the lives of those that we've lost to COVID-19. So thank you for that. I think everyone here, at least on Zoom, those of you who are joining on Instagram Live, should know that I'm joined by 2 brilliant Black women. I actually met Dr. Gina Jeff. We didn't speak the first time I met her, but we were at an event together. And I saw this beautiful, brilliant sister who had these dope earrings that she has on now. And I wanted to say something to her to compliment her, but I also thought about the reality that Black women seldom just are able to be. So I let her be, and I posted a picture of her on my Instagram. And within seconds, everyone I know connected to Spelman and Spell House let me know who she was and that she was not only beautiful, but she was brilliant. And so I'm joined by Dr. Janina Jeff, who's a PhD and has a master's in science. She's a population geneticist, a informatician?
Bioinformatician.
Informatician. I've never had to say that word before. Y'all know I got a lot of degrees, don't judge me. And a educator, motivational speaker, and podcaster. She's the first Black woman or Black person to graduate with a PhD in human genetics from Vanderbilt University. I need to get one of those like applause tracks because I would play it now. And currently a senior bioinformatics scientist at Illumina, where she develops technology for companies like Ancestry and 23andMe. I know a lot of y'all have those kits. I have it and haven't used it. I actually should ask you a question about it. She's also a graduate of Spelman and gave a really dope TED Talk at the Girl TEDx Flatbush, Afrofuturism thought through the power of the genome. Look it up now. I will also share it through our digital platforms. And she also has a podcast that we're going to talk about called In Those Genes, a dope play on the term genes for genetics, but also those genes that we like to wear. And I know some of y'all have been jumping in yours like Beyonce described on the Savage remix. We talk about that too. Gene, actually, she said she got it from Tina. Right? Yes. She said she got it from Tina. Let's talk about that. We're also joined by Dr. Linnell Campbell, MD, MS, and she is a rising chief resident in emergency medicine at Jacobi Montefiore, a medical center in the Bronx. That's a BFD, right? And when I read it for the first time, I thought of Grey's Anatomy and my favorite character there, who's getting everybody together. She received her BS in biological sciences from SUNY College at Old Westbury and attended Howard University. This is where, if I was somewhere public, I'd say HU and wait for everybody to say,
you know.
Right, see? And so they both joined us. And really what I'm hoping that we can talk about is what it's like to be on the front lines as professionals, as Black women. Dr. Campbell, you working in a hospital, and Dr. Jeff, you working in a lab. And so I have a few questions, but before I get into that, thinking about how we started 7 o'clock shift change, people making noise in New York. I'm also certain at some point I'll likely need this while you're talking, because we'll hear sirens. I'm close to Harlem Hospital while sheltered in place in New York. As people, how does all of this make each of you feel? Dr. Campbell, why don't we start with you, and then Dr. Jeff, why don't you join in?
Well, there are two sides to it. There's a doctor side to it, and then, like you mentioned before, just being a Black person in medicine. Just from the doctor side of things, I just remember hearing about this in the beginning of February, and everyone's kind of just watching what's happening in China. Everyone's like, oh, there's this virus that's going on in China. We don't know what's happening. A bunch of people are dying. We think it's like SARS, what we saw a few years ago. But then when we realized that this was something bigger, the next sort of thing that was felt was this anxiety. Everyone was kind of like, when is this going to hit New York? When is this going to hit the US? Then after China, we saw what was going on in Italy. And that really scared us a lot, because I think Italy, they just had this, crazy mortality rate. And we're like, wait, like this can happen here. And I think once it started to really dawn on a lot of us that this can happen here, we started feeling a lot of anxiety, because then our administration started sending out all these emails. Oh, we need to create search plans. We need to do this. We need to create intubation protocols. And the feeling every time I would go to work would be all of this anxiety. When are we going to see our first case? Have we seen our first case at all? Have we already been exposed? And then along with that then is the information overload of, you're reading all these journal articles, you're watching the news, everyone's talking about it, and your brain is just COVID, coronavirus, COVID. And then when it actually hit us, it became this more so emotional and physical toll that it started taking on us. Physical toll of, wearing all this PPE every day, which is physically exhausting. You got on all these suits all day, these masks on your face. You can't breathe. You're breathing your own breath that you haven't eaten, for the whole day. So you're doing that, but then also, you're sweating, and then patients are coming in, and you're just physically exhausted at the end of the day. And then it turns into this emotional thing where, the dust kind of starts to settle a little bit, and you start really starting to look at patients and saying, like, I walked into a shift in the beginning of March, and I'm getting sign out from the doctors who were on earlier in the day, and every other patient is, oh, this patient is most likely going to die in the next 12 hours. This patient is mostly going to die in the next 12 hours. And you just get overwhelmed, like, I'm in emergency medicine. So, for me, I've seen people die before, it's just unfortunately part of the job. But on the scale that we were seeing, it was just so daunting. Intubating people, and if anyone's on and doesn't know what intubation is, it's when you're basically putting a tube down someone's throat to breathe for them and putting them on a breathing machine. And in any given 12-hour shift, we might do it to one person or two people, depending on how busy the day is. There was a day when we did it to 13 people on a 12-hour shift. So that in itself becomes really daunting. But, with all the stress and everything, what has come out of it, though, I think, are these really important conversations that I don't think people were having before. And I'm sure we're going to touch on a lot of it tonight, but, discussing about vulnerable populations, especially of our Black and Brown people, talking about how they don't know how to access healthcare, and how there's a whole historical, reason for that. Everyone's throwing around the term social distancing and how that affects other people. Like some of our patients cannot socially distance when they're living in one-bedroom apartments with 4 other people. Also a discussion about mental health, within the community, for doctors in terms of wellness. People think, oh, you're a doctor, you should be fine. You see this all the time. And it's, we do, but not on this scale. So I don't want to delve too much into it because I know we're going to touch on some of those as we go on, but that's pretty much what it's been. The good part of it now in New York City is we're seeing sort of a downturn of all of this. We're seeing a lot of low volume, still seeing sick people, but we think social distancing hasn't working because we're not admitting as many people, we're not intubating as many people. So hopefully we're moving in the right direction with this for now.
Let us hope. Same question to you, Dr. Jeff. How does this feel?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my emotions have been up and down and up and down. At the beginning of the year, when everyone in my network and the science network were, talking about coronavirus, I really downplayed it. I'll just be honest and say that. I was looking at the numbers and I was looking at the cases of the flu, and I was like, well, more people, we're having a really bad flu year, and we should be talking about these people who are dying from the flu, which are a lot of times Black and brown and poor people. And so I was at first kind of like, but then, that quickly changed. And I would say I really started to think about the entire thing differently when the myth that Black people were immune to it kind of came around. And that's kind of when I started to people started pinging me, and I started to really pay a closer attention, because to say words like that can be really life-changing. It's detrimental. You can kill people, and we're seeing that now. And so it's important that we know our history and what we say when we say that someone is immune to something or is resistant to something, that we understand what that is, especially when majority of people are getting their news from people like us on social media, or different news sources that are contradicting at times. And so I kind of that's when I started to really take this to another level and wanted to really dispel that myth that, what we know about immunology and what we know about biology, very unlikely that this disease is not going to affect Black people. And what's heartening about that, I put out a very long tweet about it, in which it kind of yielded into a whole episode that we had on the podcast about coronavirus and Black folks, called That Rona. And we've been doing weekly updates really to dispel myths in the media. And so that's kind of has been where I have started to feel. And then in the midst of all of this, I also got coronavirus. And so getting the virus and experiencing that in the midst of, trying to educate a community about all the myths that we know in science changed everything. Unfortunately, I've had 2 people pass in my family from coronavirus in New Orleans, which was hit pretty hard. And just realizing that very early on, late February, early March, that one piece of news probably impacted a lot of the way we socialized and thought about the virus as Black people, which literally could have, and I'm not saying that it did, but I would be naive to think that it did not have any type of effect on the high numbers that we're seeing. Obviously, there are a lot of other things that are happening as well. And so that's kind of I've had a very interesting experience with it, from getting the virus to learning so much about the virus and sharing that knowledge about the virus on the podcast. And so on the podcast, whenever we talk about the virus, and one thing that I'm extremely passionate about is taking these complex science terms and breaking them down using Black culture. And so when we describe SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that leads to the disease COVID-19, we, are not just educating people the way that CNN or the way that Dr. Anthony Fauci is. We are literally changing the language and making it accessible to our community, because that is extremely important when you have things that everyone needs to learn. And I feel like a lot of the media and the news do not do this enough for communities of color and all kind of communities that endure some type of oppression. And it can be detrimental and life-saving. And so that's what we do on the podcast. We literally explain what coronavirus is, what immunity is, what it means to be going through a pandemic in prison, and talk about it even from the social justice aspect, right? And how social justice starts to intersect with medicine. And so my experience has been very broad. Happy to talk about all of them.
No, yeah, I appreciate it. I took some notes. I also wrote in the chat, for those who don't know, the podcast is In Those Genes, GENES, it's super brilliant, subscribe now. We also included a link in NBJC's e-blast. So let's stay at a place where you highlighted, Dr. Jeff, which is the media and messaging. It is significant to me that you share that story, in part because I was in Jamaica enjoying the first and last vacation that I will have in a while, when most of what I heard about the virus was that Black people were immune, right? We were sort of celebrating this Wakanda-like feeling that it was something that was happening to everybody else. Maybe I wouldn't even go down that rabbit hole, but let's just say that I was celebrating what felt like a sense of protection, only to return back to the United States the day before there were thoughts of and talks about shutting down travel. And then it seemed almost within weeks, especially again being in New York City, that it went from Black people feeling protected to Black people realizing that, like most things in America, as a result of race and racism, we were disproportionately impacted. And so things shifted. NBJC even produced a report highlighting that disparate impact and really trying to make some connections to the HIV epidemic, not only because a lot of the drugs that people were mentioning are drugs that have been tested in HIV spaces, but because again, in both crises, we saw Black people be disproportionately impacted. And so the question I have for both of you is, what is the media getting right about COVID? Again, acknowledging that the virus is rapidly developing and our understanding and knowledge of it and how it's affecting us globally is also changing rapidly by the minute. What's the media getting right? And then conversely, especially as it relates to Black folks, acknowledging the beautiful diversity amongst us, what is the media getting wrong?
Yeah, I can, I'll speak really quickly because my answer of what they're getting right is very limited. So I would say
I was gonna say the same thing.
The only thing I think is really right is I've never seen messaging that says we have, well, aside from 45, which I mean, aside from 45, most of the news that I listen to, which I'll go ahead and not acknowledge that is probably biased and very liberal, they have not gotten wrong the fact that we do not have enough testing. That has not been wrong. And the fact that we were unprepared. I have consistently heard that message. I think people get that. So I wanted to just go back just a little bit. This is kind of off topic to the immunity thing, and why it's so important that myths like that in the media be killed immediately. Like, I mean, when I heard that, I didn't even think I was just writing an essay on Twitter. It probably made no sense, but the one headliner is "We not immune, don't act like this." And that's because if we go back to the 18th century, 1740, when yellow fever was running rampant, right? There was a myth that this scientist, one of the slave ships that came in from South Carolina, when yellow fever was rampant, all the white people died, all of the slaves on that ship survived. And so he wrote this hypothesis that Black people were immune to yellow fever. Fast forward a couple of years later, a yellow fever breakout happens in Philadelphia. Well, back then, doctors collected notes from other doctors who experienced or who treated patients with these things. And so this new doctor read, well, hey, Black people are immune. And a bunch of abolitionists got together, went to the AME church and told Black folks like, hey, you're immune. It's your Christian duty to come and stay in Philadelphia while, mind you, the whole city fled because of yellow fever. But we want the Black people to stay and take care of these white folks who are getting sick by yellow fever, you know, teaching them how to do nursing and teaching them how to care for people. And this was a message that people believed. And what happened? These Black people stayed, and guess what? They got yellow fever and they died. And so this history of viruses and diseases and us being immune to these diseases predate back then to slavery. And so we have too much access, too much knowledge, too many resources to, go down this path, but it still happens. And so in terms of what they're getting right, I do think that I've never seen messaging that says we have enough tests and the testing are great. Everything I've seen around testing has been, to my knowledge, very like, might be right, might be wrong. We don't have enough. We're not prepared. And I think that's the only thing that I've seen that's right. In terms of what's wrong, everything else, I mean, I can go into the things that I think are most harmful. I'll start with what I think is most harmful. Most harmful is that this mask. It started off as you need an N95 mask, right? Then it went to, okay, we don't have enough N95 masks. And then the physicians were speaking out that they didn't even have masks. And then it went to like, you can just make a cloth mask. And now it's just like a whole fad. I don't know about y'all, but I got Instagram ads galore about, I've seen a Spelman mask. I've seen masks with funny things on it. Like masks have become a thing now. But I personally, and I talk about my own experience with the virus, I think I contracted the virus by shared surfaces. So a lot of us who live in New York, I live in a brownstone in Brooklyn, I share the same door, I share the same rail, I share a lot of the same surfaces with my neighbors. Even if I'm going downstairs to Amazon to pick up a package, I am touching surfaces in what I think is a safe space and coming back to my house. One thing I don't think we're talking about enough is that we know the virus lives on hard surfaces for 72 hours. And we tell people to wash their hands and we tell people to do these things. But are you gonna really remember when you go downstairs to pick up your Amazon package to wash your hands when you come back inside? Or even if you just went, I don't know, just saying that like, we're not really paying attention to the surfaces that we're touching, and even have a mask on, touching our face after taking the mask off. There's some washing your hands for a long period of time. I feel like we haven't been talking about the message around wearing gloves hasn't really been pressed a lot. And the messages around hand washing, although it's there, I feel like it's still not something that people are taking seriously. And I feel like the virus living on surfaces is probably going to be the one that gets people like me who are socially distancing and wearing the mask and doing everything right. So those are kind of like the main ones. And then obviously a big one that you talked about, we can talk about why it's disproportionate between Black folks and white folks, but let's talk about why, right? No one wants to talk about why. We're about to shed a big light on our healthcare system of why. And the answer to why, and I'll let Linnell speak to a lot of this, is, you know, health inequality. That's why. And that predates before Corona came to the US. That's been going on for forever.
Before you tap in, Dr. Campbell, Dr. Jeff, let me ask you, what are you doing? What's the solution to acknowledging that the virus lives on hard surfaces, especially for those of us who lived in shared spaces? Like, are you doing anything differently than you did before you tested positive?
Yes. So, well, now my situation is a little bit different because I've had it. I've socially distanced. One thing I'm doing though is I wear gloves everywhere I go, and the first thing I do when I come inside, even if I'm going for a run, which is quote unquote safe, I take off the gloves, I wash my hands, and dispose it. If I'm touching a new surface that's not in my house, I disinfect it. One more thing that I was going to mention in terms of the media that I think is very harmful is that even the guidelines that we're putting out are politically motivated. And those guidelines are politically motivated and really geared towards, you know, capitalism, and that we do need to open back up. And so that's something that's really scary to me, because as a person who's trying to understand, can I go back outside? I'm going to go to the CDC. I'm going to go to World Health Organization. But if their messaging is convoluted with like political biases that you're good after 7 days, but none of the science has proven that, then we're going to be right in the same boat, and we're going to see, you know, some really bad things happen. But yes, I wash all the surfaces, I wear all the gloves, I do all the things.
Okay, fair. Dr. Campbell, what's the media getting right? What's the media getting wrong? And what can you share with us, lay people, about the history of the medical industrial complex and its abuse of Black bodies?
Oh man, that's all right. Let me start with the media. So one of the things, and I'll agree with Dr. Jeff with this, is they're getting right that we don't have enough testing. One, that is definitely an issue I've seen across all media outlets. And I watch both conservative and liberal news as well. I will watch Fox News, and I will also watch CNN. I will also read the New York Times. That is sort of between all the types of news networks that I watch, something that they've been getting right. Obviously, certain news networks, what they have begun to get right is talking about these social determinants of health and how this has been affecting Black populations more than others. I've seen that definitely on news networks. I've also seen news networks actually put on an entire town hall meeting for children. So I really appreciated that, because I think it gave parents the words to talk to their children about with this, because I think always, I always think you got to start from young kids, you get them ingrained in all the things that they need to be doing right, like washing their hands, and also talking to them about how they're feeling about all of this. Because kids, unfortunately, they're like, why can't I go see my friends, and why can't I do this and play outside? So I thought that was really good. But just like Dr. Just said, they're getting a lot of things wrong. And when we talk about media, for me, it's not just the news media, but social media. Things are spreading really fast media. Somebody posts up something, that some video somebody took, outside of a hospital once, and showed that the hospital was pretty much empty. They're like, oh, this is a hoax because, look, the hospital doesn't look that busy. I'm like, well, you haven't walked inside. You don't know what the ICUs are looking like. You don't know what any of that is looking like. People are out there putting out all this information about 5G and all of that. And it's been hard to hear people really approach me and ask me about these things. And, at first I'm like, what are you talking about? Why would you think that? But then again, when you're, getting all of your news from social media, that in itself, Facebook's algorithm is geared to sending you whatever it is you said you liked, or, so if you click one thing, they're going to send you more stuff about that anyway. So if you click the wrong type of news that's misinformation, you're going to continue getting misinformation, but you don't know that. So those are the things that they're getting wrong. I think there's also the conversation about, and this is going to kind of tie into, about the history of healthcare in this country, policies. There are policies that have been around for ages that have led to a lot of this. And, it's not just one individual, it's not 45, he's just right now, he's the agent of all of those policies that have been made to keep Black people, or to stop them from advancing in this country. And so it's all these policies that are made, slavery, if anyone doesn't know, all these experiments that were done, it's hard being a Black person in the medical field, and sort of you're on both sides of these things. Like, I know what has happened to my people during this, but at the same time, I will always be an advocate for the medical field, but I can't deny the history that was there, experiments that were done on Black people. So experimentation throughout all of Black history in America, using slaves to, perform surgeries, to do obstetrics, cutting off body parts, showing off their bodies, when we talk about, medical experimentation, everyone, I think most people have heard about the Tuskegee experiment, they're more experiment. I don't want to get too into it because we only have a short amount of time. So what that has done, so there's the policies and then there's the history. And then, so the policies, it's all political, right? No one's come out in politics, well, most people don't come out and say, I'm a racist. I don't think Black people should advance. I don't think Black people need healthcare. I don't think Black people, should be, overinsured or adequately insured. But they create these policies that they do. And this is, I'm very active on a lot of these medical Facebook groups. And I tell people, it's like, I'm not saying that you're a bad person, but you're supporting policies that don't promote equity for people. Okay. And when you don't support equity, people, don't get the healthcare they deserve. They also don't trust the medical system. And the trust also comes from these experimentation. And so, and I'm sure some of us have heard, and even in our own families, they don't trust doctors. They don't trust these drugs. They don't trust what they're saying. And so that's in itself the psychological impact of all these policies, of slavery and all these things, and the cultural impacts as well. And so this is where sort of my work comes in. I think Dr. Jeff and I were talking about this before, because she asked me like, well, what are you doing? You know, sort of what are you doing in your day-to-day as a doctor to kind of combat all of this? And yeah, I show up to work. I'm a Black doctor, you know, I've passively done it, right? I've passively done what some people think, oh, that's great, you're a Black doctor, that should be enough. And for me, that's not enough though. You know, it's not enough to just be the Black doctor in the room, you know, for the diversity picture that they need. That I need to put my voice and what I know in there and use my platform. And, you know, Dr. Jeff has her podcast. For me, I am all about administration. You know, I want to be in the C-suite at a hospital. I want to tell them like, you know what, this policy that we're doing, or this policy that you guys are discussing right now in this hospital is not promoting equity. I'll be the first person to say that, and I'll be a person who can make that decision there. Also integrating it into our medical training for people. You know, Dr. Jeff and I had a whole conversation before this, and it's just, you know, I think a lot of people, you know, so I'm in the Bronx, okay? And the Bronx is one that has some of the poorest health outcomes in the entire country, specifically in the zip code where my hospital is. And you get a lot of these doctors who come here and they want to train here because, you know, they want to, you know, work in low income populations, but they want to pat themselves on the back for slumming it. That's what I call it. Like, you're patting yourself on the back for slumming it, but you don't really care about these people. Like, what are you actually doing in your day to day? Are you going out? Are you learning this community? Are you learning what it's like to be, you know, a person who's living in a 1-bedroom apartment, you know, with 4 other people, or, you know, who you can't socially distance from and things like that. And they're not doing that. And so for me, I have a platform now, and that's what I'm going to use. And again, it's not just about, I tell people, just talking about it. Like, you have to educate the community. You have to learn the community so you know kind of where you're meeting them, and you have to educate them for that, because there's an entire, again, we're not going to fix this in one day. COVID's not going to fix all the social determinants of health no matter what we do, but we need to kind of be in a position where we can make changes in these policies, one, but then also make changes in our culture as well. And so I hold everyone accountable for that. If you aren't on Instagram and you've got 100,000 followers, like, you should not be posting up all this 5G nonsense. Like, you know, use it for something positive. You know, let people know, like, this is not real. Stay home, wash your hands. You know, if you don't know how to get to a hospital, you don't know how an emergency room works, that's, a hospital should be going out there and teaching the community, you know, this is how you get to us. This is how you get plugged in.
Yeah, I said this to both of you before we started, but I'll say it again now, in part because Milka has said it on our chat on Zoom. Andreas on Instagram says, talk good, sis. Somebody else said, Black doctors matter. And so if you don't hear me say anything else, both of you hear me when I say thank you for all that you do for so many, including our community. Before I ask a question that Dre asked on Instagram, I want to ask both of you, what are your sources of news and information? Again, I want to encourage everybody to subscribe to the In Those Genes podcast. You both mentioned a few, but where should people be going to get information about Corona and COVID specifically, but about health and wellness more generally?
You can go ahead, Dr. Campbell.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, in general, information about COVID, you know, I've been telling, for me, it's CDC, your Department of Health. Those are the two, for me, most reliable sources you can use. You know, unfortunately, like I'll say it again, you know, Instagram's not all the best place to get your news from. You have to have a set number of places where you can go get information, but also be wary of using too many resources, because then you get a lot of information overload and you just get very overwhelmed with it. For me personally, because I'm in the medical field, we have our one specialty specific. So I'm in emergency medicine. So we have our specialty specific places where we go to get our information. And what I do is I take that and I sort of break it down, you know, very simply for family, for friends and things like that. You know, a podcast like Janina's, I will promote it again. You know, that's where you need to go get your information from. You need to make sure that wherever you're getting your information from, the people who are giving it to you are certified in this. They're not just throwing the, you know, the doctor or the MD after their name, that they've actually researched this. And then also in terms of health and wellness, I mean, it's hard to say where people should get their health and wellness from because it's different for different people. You know, I'm a very strong advocate of keeping strong social groups. You know, it's very difficult during this time because, you know, everyone's socially distancing, but we all have a phone. Most people have phones. If you have internet access, you can call people, you can, you know, do FaceTimes and Zoom conferences. And also, more than ever, I think it's important, just this is a time to sort of reflect on your own health, you know, and some of the people young people I've seen who've gotten the sickest from COVID, unfortunately, have been people who are, you know, who smoke and who are overweight. I'm not saying that it's all entirely their fault, but you have a time now that you can sort of sit back and say, okay, what can I do to make myself healthier? You know, can I make better choices? You know, you have the time now, learn how to cook a healthy meal. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day, like, I love eating Caribbean food, but it is the worst food for you in the world. So, you know, how do I make those meals a little bit healthier and better, so I can take hold of my own health? Shadina has some other places.
Yeah, market opportunity.
I mean, so my favorite COVID resources, I have a few. So obviously, I'm going to say the podcast because I stay up all night researching and learning and doing something that I encourage everyone to do, which is lateral reading. And so lateral reading means once you see a headline, you not only read the full article, but you also validate the source by having multiple articles that are confirming the same thing from different points of view. So for example, New York Times might post something like, I want to talk about immunoprivilege in a bit, but like, what is immunoprivilege? Well, in order to understand immunoprivilege and how it's going to affect Black people, we got to understand immunity and what exactly does immunity mean in the context of COVID-19. And so literally for every topic, I'm reading about 10 to 15 science journals or media that post, that write about science. So the New York Times right now has unlimited reading for anything that's COVID-19 specific. So I highly recommend reading the New York Times. And actually this immunoprivilege, I do want to talk about it, but this article, there was an op-ed piece posted about that. I think it's extremely important. I'll come back to that. Another thing is Andy Slavitt. So Andy Slavitt he was the person who was going to be leading the infectious disease kind of like task force that Obama set up. So he was under the Obama administration. But since COVID-19 happened, Andy Slavitt has been really good at posting just straight facts on Twitter. So much so his facts have been turned into a Medium blog. And then more recently, he got a podcast. So my podcast is definitely focused, it's for us, it's by us, it's cussing, it's hip hop, it's a whole bunch of stuff in there, okay? And we get straight to the point, and we try to take all this, like I said, I'm reading 15 science papers, that might come into one paragraph about how coronavirus is a couch surfer trying to swag surf playing in the background. This literally happened in our Rona episode, okay? And so like our podcast is one of them, but other podcasts that I like are Science Versus. So Science Versus is a podcast by Gimlet. They have now been doing, I think, bi-weekly updates on COVID-19, and it is very digestible. I mean, it's not, they're not swag surfing, but it's digestible. And for health and wellness more generally, like Dr. Campbell said, for me, I kind of do different things. So although I'm a medical, like I work in the medical field, I always joke and say I'm not a great adult, because when I got the virus, I leaned into where I did training at Mount Sinai Hospital. So I just went to Mount Sinai. I telemedicine at Mount Sinai and called it a day. But I really didn't have like a team of physicians. And so going to the doctor is so important, and understanding free resources that are available are so important. I would recommend actually both Dr. Campbell and I, the way that we met our mutual friend, Apollo Brown, he actually hosts weekly COVID-19 updates on his Instagram. And so I think his Instagram is Dr. Apollo Brown, but I'll send it to you so you can share it. It's unfortunately the same time that we're talking right now. But he's been a good one. And also he was a part of a consortium of Black men, ER doctors, who really quickly published a paper on how COVID-19 is affecting Black folks. And so those are kind of like my go-to, but I encourage everyone, lateral reading is extremely important, extremely important, and making sure that your sources are credible.
Appreciate that. If you send it to me, I definitely will make sure that we share it. Lawana Roberts asks, are there any efforts underway amongst the national medical organizations, particularly maybe the National African American Medical Organizations, to consolidate efforts to get a uniform message out to our communities with accurate information that offsets what the media misses or spins? Anything that you're aware of?
I mean, oh, definitely. I mean, as soon as all of this started happening, I mean, my phone was just lighting up with people calling, you know, especially because we're in New York. There definitely is. These were actually conversations that have been happening before COVID, really discussing social determinants of health over the past, I would say, 3 to 4 years that I've been really involved in medicine. And so one of the things that I think COVID has really lit fire on is research. I am not a big researcher by trade, but apparently because I'm very involved in social determinants of health, I'm actually going to put out a paper with Dr. Tyler Brown pretty soon, hopefully by early next week about this. So there's definitely been a lot of work that's being done with this. Unfortunately, one of our major conferences that we have during the year, called the National Medical Association, which is basically the Black all specialty medical association, may not happen this year just because of all of this, but we're definitely having a lot of conversations about this, normalizing it. The NIH has opened a lot of grant money to do research in social determinants of health. They've even, for physicians, they have offered like loan forgiveness for us, for those physicians who do this research. Even at my own institution, you know, we've got, you know, a few people who have pumped out research on all different types of things, and they're now saying like, hey, I've done research on headaches and pain medications. I want to do research on social determinants of health now. And so I think now, and again, it's a blessing and, you know, sort of in disguise, unfortunately, that COVID had to happen for people to start normalizing these conversations. But I'm glad that it has, because I think it's shown people that while it's been around a long time, it's right in front of you now. It is your patient. Look at your emergency room right now. It is right in front of you. And we can't run from it anymore. We can't say, oh, well, you know, it's because people don't eat properly or because they smoke, or no, this is this country's history in front of us in 3 months. This entire history of Black healthcare in the country is here in 3 months.
Yeah, I find myself saying a lot that we should all be clear that we're only as healthy as the least of these amongst us, right? And I mean that in every way.
Exactly.
And it literally is now given the health concern. Dre.
I wanted to say one more thing before you answer that. One more thing that I didn't, in terms of health and wellness, and in terms of understanding how the healthcare system is impacted by systemic racism, I highly recommend people read the author Dorothy Roberts. And so Dorothy Roberts has 3 books. One is called like Killing the Black Body. The other one is called Shattered Binds. And the last one is called Fetal Intervention. And so she is a law professor by training, but she talks specifically about a lot of like examples. We talked about Tuskegee, but she'll talk about kind of like a lot of things that didn't get airplay and kind of like why they happened, and really how these systems are built. In other words, not for us, but she does a deep dive in terms of like racism and healthcare. So in terms of general health and wellness. So sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure people have access to.
No, it's okay. And I just want to add in one more thing in terms of healthcare. I mentioned before, being a Black doctor, you're massively, making, a great name for, Black people in medicine. I said, but I think one of the things we also have to make sure that we're doing is that we're advocating for our healthcare. Not every hospital has a Black doctor that's going to advocate for Black patients, or even doctors who will advocate. So I think we need to be advocates for our own healthcare. And this is part of what Janine was talking about. You come there and you've been reading, the appropriate resources and things that you're going to know what questions to ask. You're going to be able to advocate for yourself, but also for your family members who can't advocate for themselves. And so that's a big part of it. I can only do so much. But one of the things that I try to do with my patients, I'm in emergency medicine, so sometimes I see patients one and I'll never see them again. But I give them sort of like, hey, I'm going to send you to your primary care doctor. Make sure when you're there that you ask them these questions. Ask them why they have you on this medication. Ask them, tell them that you're having these symptoms, and hey, can you put me on another medication because this is not doing well for me. You came here today because you didn't understand how to take your blood pressure medication. Make sure you go back and you ask your doctor this. And so on my discharge papers, I even put down, like, make sure to ask your doctor these questions. So I think that on my end, I have to hold myself accountable that I'm doing that so that people can go out there and be stronger and advocate for themselves.
Yeah, let's stay in that space. I want to ask a couple of questions that have come up a little bit more rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Dre says, are there things we can do to prepare our bodies for COVID? It feels like more of a when I get infected versus a not will I get infected scenario that we're in. Cheyenne asked, and Jerry, I'll combine both of these. So Jerry says, fill us in on things that we should tell others that aren't listening. Those that are maybe asymptomatic or just don't know that they might have COVID or might be exposed to it. And Cheyenne also asked us to ground this a bit, reminding us that not everybody has access to the language or capacity to digest articles, to engage in lateral reading, to access podcasts. So are there other resources for people with varying levels of literacy? So 3 separate but related questions. Are there things we should be doing, especially as people of color, connected to the diaspora, connected through the diaspora? Are there resources for folks with varying literacy levels? And then what should everybody who listens to this be telling other people in their network, people that might not ever sit down and engage in a podcast or otherwise consume a TED Talk?
Mm-hmm. All right. I'll go first. I believe the first question, can you just repeat the first question? That was, what should they be doing if they're not sick? Are there things that we can do now to prepare our bodies
for when we get it?
Okay.
He's saying essentially like it's almost like the flu, right? Like I'm not if I'll get it, but when, and if so, what should I be doing now?
Right. I think it's, the same thing a lot of other doctors will say. Just, you have to optimize your body, that comes with eating well as you can. Okay. That's a whole nother topic we can spend an entire hour talking or more talking about. Eating as well as you can within your confines and what you are able to get. If you feel that you do not have adequate access to nutritional foods, there are a lot of community organizations, especially now, that are going out there and are donating food to people who don't have access to nutrient dense food. One of the things, just as an aside, my hospital is doing something that we've, on our triage questions, instead of just asking your name, your age, do you have insurance? It's, hey, do you have access to, do you feel like you have enough access to quality food? If you don't, we have programs that we can connect that to. So that's one thing, and calling any local community organization can get you into that. The other thing is hygiene. Janine talked about washing your hands and, wiping down surfaces. I tell people, hey, if you are in a house and you, unfortunately, you don't have the luxury of social distancing in separate rooms or even, separate levels of your house, what you can do is minimal things like wiping down all your surfaces. If you have more, if you have 5 cups in your house and there are 5 of you, designate one as your cup. So you use that cup, you wash it, it's only you using that cup. Same thing for everyone else in the house. When you brush your teeth, wipe down the surfaces. There's a lot of discussion about how the virus is spread and things like that. And it's, what we call droplets. Not necessarily that it's airborne. It's coming from these, droplets that are attached to, a sort of the mucus in your nose, in your mouth, in your throat. And if you cough, you may not be able to see it, but it can land on different surfaces. And, like Janine said, you're putting your hands on everything. So make sure that things like, like the bathroom, you're brushing your teeth and you're blowing your nose and things like that, that you're wiping down those surfaces from time to time. But then also, it's hard to say to minimize stress in certain situations, but make sure that you are getting enough rest. Okay, you ain't gotta go to the club at night anymore on the weekends now. So you should be at home, resting yourself.
Quarantine.
Quarantine, drinking. Exactly. So it's all these basic things that I understand sometimes it's hard to do these things. I can't tell you, well, go to Whole Foods and eat only organic. I can't even sometimes afford Whole Foods, you know what I mean? And so I can imagine, for someone who's having financial difficulties, how hard it is. But like I said, you have to reach into community resources, and sometimes they'll reach out to you, but go out there and don't be afraid to tell people that you need the help. That's the other part of it. Don't be afraid to tell people, like, hey, if you have a neighbor who is going to the supermarket, tell them, like, hey, I need this, or because I'm not able to go out because I'm sick or because I'm elderly or something like this. And if you are the healthy person and you have a neighbor who is elderly or sick, doesn't drive, isn't able to get out there, now is the time to say, yeah, hey, do you need anything? Do you need a bag of spinach or something? Anything like that.
Dr. Jeff, let me ask you two separate but related questions, and feel free to fill in any gaps. My sis online asked, what's the best advice for someone to advocate for themselves who've been turned away, right? So as somebody who has tested positive for COVID, do you have any advice for other patients who feel like they might be showing symptoms, maybe don't want to go to a hospital, acknowledging how much advice you've gotten about that being the place that you will test positive after visiting? Any advice for advocacy? And then another question that came to us from the pre-registrants was, can you test positive for COVID twice?
Okay, a couple of things. So just to add on to Dr. Campbell, another thing that I'm doing right now in terms of preparing is taking drops of echinacea, which boosts your immune system. So I would say any type of immune health things you can do. And I'm also taking L-lysine, which is another pill you can take twice a day. And L-lysine has kind of been shown to kill the virus. So that's another thing. Like we can talk about antibacterials and L-lysine.
Okay.
L-lysine and echinacea. These are just natural remedies, but there's a lot of scientific evidence that they boost your immune system and are good. So I take that, I do that, and I've been doing that since. In terms of like being turned away and that kind of thing, so I was actually diagnosed via telemedicine, and I would say more than likely, and this is just a protocol that I know exists at Mount Sinai NYU, is that if you are low risk and, well, at the time when I got it, low risk and likely being able to survive at home, they will recommend that you stay at home. And that is because if it, for any chance that you don't have COVID-19, you're more at risk going to the hospital and getting tested. And also you're also overworking the healthcare system. So that I wouldn't say is like not uncommon to be diagnosed via telemedicine. And that's why it's really important in the next couple of weeks as antibody testing becomes available. And just to perspective, there's two types of tests out there. A test that is looking to see if the virus is currently present in your body. And then there's a test to see if you have had the virus, recovered, and now you produce, I like to call it a security system. Now your body has a security system, and they know when they see Rona again, that shit is about to go down, right? So like if you have antibodies, it's testing to see if you have antibodies. That's really important in us understanding when COVID-19 came to the US. There's some papers that are suggesting now that we have antibody testing that we got COVID-19 in January in California. And so really, really important. The last question you asked, can you get COVID-19 twice? So right now, the generic answer is that we don't know. But I would like to say that like Based on what we know about science, is very unlikely. Based on what we know about the genetics of this virus, also very unlikely. Reason being, there have been reports of people who test positive, then test negative, and then test positive again. That is not reinfection. What's happening is that the test that we're doing is likely producing a false negative result. And that false negative results mean when we tested you at that time, your viral load or the amount of virus you had in you was undetectable. It doesn't mean that you didn't have the virus. And so this, again, if you're asymptomatic and you go and get a test and it comes back negative, that you could still have COVID-19. I mean, you could still have SARS-CoV-2. You may not have developed the symptoms to develop COVID-19. And this is why antibody tests are important. I just learned today that in New York, City MD is offering antibody tests. Antibody test for people. You can walk up, you can go and get the antibody test. If you haven't had symptoms, you think you've likely come in contact with it, or you want to know if you do or you don't, I would highly recommend that. Right now, there are 4 emergency FDA approved antibody tests. And one last thing I'm just going to say really quickly about immunoprivilege. This happened back during slavery. I can see it happening now. One person even said it's not a matter of if I get COVID-19, it's a matter of when. That's a very real thing that's going to impact our community. Back during slavery, people were trying to get yellow fever to become immune so they could go back to work. Okay? People are going to do the same thing here, right? People are going to try and go and get it so they can get immune and go back to work because we got to make money and we got to survive. And unfortunately, this is another thing that's impacting the Black community, this capitalistic pressure to return back to life. The thing is, we got to be very careful because if we take this approach, and this is called herd immunity, where we all try and get it, if we take this approach, millions of people are going to die. Social distancing is a very real thing. I don't care if they open it up, stay your Black ass at home, right? And just wait out because people like Dr. Campbell are going to be overwhelmed if we keep going outside. And I'll just say that. Sorry, that
definitely
was like
is. And yeah, I mean, I'll just chime in very quickly with that. I completely agree with everything Dr. Jeff said, and I think we need to sort of look at, when places like Georgia are talking about opening up these places, they're talking about opening up all these service industry jobs. And guess who works at all these service industry jobs? People who are usually low income, and the people who are usually low income are Black and brown people. And so it's kind of like the political pressure is saying, look, just open it up so these people can get back to work. And we, the people who are making all the money can say, their businesses can thrive. So again, like Black lives are thrown again to the wolves.
Yeah.
So that's the unfortunate part of it. But, and I'm glad Dr. Jeff opened it up. Stay your ass at home, please.
Please.
Stay your ass at home for me.
Everybody is looking raggedy together. Some of us got a little going on more than others. So please stay at home.
Stay your ass at home. So if you want to get back to normal, the more you stay at home, the quicker we're going to get back to normal and have our usual turn-ups and have all the fun that we want to have. But right now, we have to just sacrifice some of the things that we're comfortable with, to save people's lives so we can get through this.
Let's stay in that space. Somebody asked in the pre-submitted questions, where did it go?
Also the test from City MD, they're waiving the fee right now too.
Okay.
Yes.
And I will follow with both of you just to make sure that we concretize all of this and are able to share it. I've taken notes, but we'll share this with everybody as well. What do you all say to folks who think that this is a hoax?
Oh, don't get. It's not
I want to get started. Go ahead. Y'all go ahead, grow.
Let me just start with a list of questions that I've gotten because I mean,
go ahead. Yeah, because
I've gotten is it a hoax? Did the Chinese just create is it bioterrorism? It's not bioterrorism. And if you want to know the science behind why, it's all genetics, which is why it's called SARS-CoV-2, because there was another one called SARS before. And so it's almost like it's technically impossible for someone to create this virus in a lab. So bioterrorism isn't happening. 5G, not a thing. Not a thing, guys.
Dude,
it's not
there's one thing that I wish that people would stop talking about is this 5G shit.
Not a thing.
Oh my God.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that we just have to understand that viruses are a part of our ecosystem. Viruses are not bad things. There's trillions and trillions and trillions of viruses, and viruses have lived on Earth for millions and millions of years, and they do way more positive things than they do negative. It's 0.02% of viruses that are pathogenic, which means that they cause a disease. So viruses are good. Viruses are the reasons why we have a human placenta. Okay, viruses are the reason why we have a what was the word? I'll list the other ones, but like viruses have done a lot of great things. Okay? They've done amazing things. They screw up every little once in a while, and this is literally just a part of human biology. Things that could have been prevented. Obviously, animals living in close proximity, so we keep farming pigs and chickens. That's not helping. So things like that that kind of promote pathogenic viruses is a problem, but it's not a hoax. And if you think it's a hoax, call your local hospital. Ask someone who's lost a loved one. I've lost loved ones. Guess what? I have a chance to say goodbye. I have a family member who's been on not a respirator, a ventilator since March 15th. We can't talk to her. We can't visit her. Okay. You have any idea how that feels? This virus is not a hoax and it's killing us. And if you want to believe that it's a hoax, you're part of the problem.
Exactly.
Period. Yeah. Someone said, can't forget bacteria are natural predators, bacterial pathogens. I don't know. This is one of your friends, Don. Cheyenne wants to know, where can we get that P-Value t-shirt? Loving it.
Yes, it's from Stem Noir.
I love that. Okay, I'm checking to see if there are any other questions as I'm acknowledging we're approaching the hour. We got kicked off at Instagram where more than 100 people were joining and listening.
Oh, wow.
And are double tapping just to say thank you, not only for what you're doing, for all the information that you're sharing. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you both think is important for people to consider, whether it's specific to COVID or the health and wellness of Black people more generally? Dr. Janina, I want to honor two things while thinking about that. One, I love language, and lateral reading is a new term to me, so thank you for that. I also, as someone who does a lot of work in the HIV space, it is interesting to me, but I had an aha moment now when you essentially offered up for me the analogy that SARS-CoV-2 is to COVID what HIV is to AIDS, and that it's about the development of them. And it was you talking about undetectable viral loads that allowed me to make that connection. So I want to say thank you for that, because I think it would allow me to be really more effective.
Just to be clear, the SARS and SARS-CoV-2 are two separate things, but the relationship from HIV to AIDS would be SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. So SARS-CoV-2 develops into COVID-19, like HIV develops into AIDS.
Thank you, appreciate it. My sister Iffy Ike is asking if you can talk more about sort of thoughts on testing and prevention and treatment in public housing. You also, at the top of our conversation, mentioned individuals in the prison industrial complex. So open it up for you to talk about what might be missed or what we should be thinking about in both of those spaces.
So in terms of testing, when we did an update on testing is sparse, is scarce. And just like Dr. Campbell said, the science is happening so fast, and you also are getting a lot of testing that's inaccurate. That happened really early on with the CDC, that the first batch of tests were reporting too many false negatives. So testing is important. Right now for the antibody test, like I said, there are 4 that have emergency FDA approval. The biggest thing about the testing, though, is that we don't have enough tests. And to give you perspective, every person, if we're talking about diagnosis of COVID-19, so that's the test that says you have it right now, and that you have it at a detectable amount right now, that test, we don't even have enough, like we're talking about the test itself, but the test has supplies, right? It's like, what is it, a HelloFresh kit? You know, it comes with all these instructions, all these little things that you got to do in order to get the test. Well, listen, if we don't have enough boxes, then we can't send you the test. And so one of the issues that we're having right now in science, we call these reagents. This really are the chemicals we need to make the test work. We don't have enough reagents. Guess where a lot of reagents are made? China. We need to have machines. So we have robots that produce these tests en masse. There's Andy Slavitt put out a Medium post. We don't have enough robots in the world right now, even if we wanted to scale up to testing. And that would mean that each person needs to be tested at least 3 times, at least 3 times. So you take whatever amount of tests we have, take every person, multiply it times 3. We need to be doing millions of tests a day, which is just feasibly impossible. Wow. It's impossible. And
then
so
even having the staff to do that.
Oh yeah, it's extremely impossible. There has been an initiative in Seattle that are doing at-home tests. And they will be, so just to give you perspective, antibody tests, the technology is the same as a pregnancy test. And so one of the technologies, there's different options, but the one that's most common is very similar to a pregnancy test. So I really do see some of these tests coming home eventually, especially as COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 becomes a part of our, our life for the rest of this year, but we're not there yet. And so that's the thing on testing. You asked me something about prisons and living in close proximity.
Yeah, prisons and public housing.
It's a risk, if we look at our university, they send everyone home because you're living in close proximity. You don't know where other people have been. And most importantly, you have asymptomatic people who are living near sick people. And so it's the asymptomatic people are the people that really spread the virus quickly, if we're being honest. When we did the update on pandemics in prison, what I had learned about the prisons, we already know that the inmates are disadvantaged. I had no idea about the healthcare network within prisons. And I had no idea that you have to pay for healthcare in prison. Like, that just blew my mind. Not so much so you're not getting the most quality health. You're getting whatever is left and whatever resources are left. And you don't have access to antibacterial hand sanitizer, and you don't have the ability to social distance from someone else, and you don't have masks, and you just on top of all of this, you don't have the opportunity to see your family, to talk to them at the same rates that you used to, and that has a mental impact on you too. And I hate that so much because there's whole populations of prison of inmates being left behind. There are some initiatives, and you probably know more about this, where we're starting to release people, especially non-violent offenders and people who are scheduled to be released anyway are getting released earlier. But it's a huge problem. And in short of it, the best analogy I like to see, white people were all invested in that damn Princess cruise ship, right? Okay. That's close proximity, but guess what else is? Prisons. Guess what else is? Public housing. Guess what else is? People who live in buildings in New York and share it with, 10,000 other people. All of these things are problems. Not, why are we not having these conversations and talking about that? We know why, but.
And to the, yes, you know why, but this is also why we need to hold people accountable. Dr. Campbell, I know you want to give, but I could almost cry thinking about the challenge of being in prison right now. It made me feel similarly sad thinking about you, Dr. Jeff, losing loved ones, not being able to mourn them in community in the ways in which we're used to. And in particular, what I'm thinking about now is that this also seems to be an employment opportunity, right? Like a workforce opportunity. If this is about us not having enough robots, in spite of the fact that there are companies that make billions of dollars developing and testing technologies that seem to have no practical application right now. So we know it's not a question. Anyway, the point here is that it seems like we should be investing energy, especially political leaders who are trying to find ways to court votes, should be thinking about how to fill these gaps and ensuring that we have the kind of testing. Dr. Campbell, I want you to tap in, but the question I'm also wondering that I want to throw out here before we land this plane is, given the impossibilities, right? It seems that in this moment, the idea of us all having access to rapid tests, multiple tests, the kind of confirmatory tests we need, it seems far off. How long do y'all think we're gonna be in this?
Oh man, we really don't know. I mean, it's hard, we have a lot of algorithms that we can use to predict this, but like I said, I think it's not just one factor we have to look at. There's so many different factors that are at play here. It's, like Dr. Jeff said, in terms of the industrial part of things, do we actually have places where we can produce this? Do we have enough reagents? Are we, what's going on in China? Are we going to be able to get supplies from China to do this? But then also, when we do have the tests, how are people going to get these tests? You know, in the 70-year-old lady who lives on the 17th floor of her apartment where the elevator is broken, how is she going to get a test? Are we going to involve community organizations to actually go into some of these places to test people who cannot get to the test? You know, so that goes back on the community, but also politics and policies. And then also in terms of, I saw something that said that one of the tests is going to cost $119 to get these tests. You know, where you have people who can't afford, you know, their normal medications, you know, and then it goes, like I said, it's this vicious cycle of you go back to people now who have more than one medical condition, who happen to be brown and Black people on a much larger scale, who are already paying for all of these medications that they're taking to manage the conditions that they already have. Now you're telling them, well, now you have to pay $119 to get tested. You know, we all know Black and brown people are either underinsured or not insured at all. So to tell someone, oh, well, your insurance is going to cover it, that's nice, but what if I don't have it? You know, when we talk about immigrant populations, you know, same thing with them. Like, what are we going to have in place? Right. So it's not just one thing, it's a multifactorial thing that needs to happen. And this is why, you know, when people ask these questions, I wish I can say, oh, we can start this as soon as possible, but we can't.
Excuse me.
No problem. So we have to have all of these things in place. And we need to have a voice in all of these different areas. And this is why it goes back to me saying you need to use your platform. Whatever platform you have to have these conversations. If you are, you know, if you're in trade or you're in a, you know, and you set up something so we can get reagents from China. If you are a physician like I am, you know, you need to be advocating for your patients. You know, if you are working in a clinic and you know that you haven't seen a good number of your clinic patients because you know that they live, you know, really far from where your clinic is, and they've already had issues coming to your clinic to see you, then you need to tap back into those and make someone, whoever's in charge of your clinic, you need to let them know, hey, what are we doing for these patients when we do get these tests? Because having the test is one thing, being able for people to get them, that's a whole other issue.
I hear you saying there are no lay people in this, and that all of us have to figure out what our responsibility and our contribution to the solution. And I'm also, you know, a lot of the work that I do is around the intersections of racial equity and LGBTQ equality. And I spend a lot of time today in particular talking about those who are living with HIV, who are also at increased risk of testing positive for COVID. And again, the thought that I had as you were talking about the cost barriers are that there are similar barriers that exist elsewhere, right? So I pay, at least in theory, I have a copay coverage from Gilead, but before I got the copay coverage, my copay for PrEP pills, the prevention pills for HIV, were $50 a month, which if you have disposable income and you're used to going to brunches on the weekend is nothing. But if you are responsible for a family and don't have disposable income, that could be the difference between you accessing the drug or not. And so I think everybody should be mindful that we live in a society where literal access to life is sometimes fettered out to those that can afford it. And that's problematic. We all have a responsibility to do something about that. Let me ask you.
Go ahead. No, I was just gonna know, just you brought up LGBTQ+. And so that's something that I work a lot with, or, you know, an area where I also work a lot in. And it's, you know, I was reading a statistic where, you know, now restaurants are closed. You know, the LGBTQ+ population makes up 30% of restaurant workers, whereas, you know, non-LGBTQ people, I forgot, you know, the exact number. And so now they're out of work on a large scale, disproportionate from other people who are out of work from restaurants. And so it's like, again, economics, you know, history, like all these historical factors that play into this. And I don't think people are really thinking about it on a large scale. And that's why it goes back to, and I'll always repeat this, and always, you need to use your platform, use your platform, use your platform, use your platform. If you don't think you have a platform, you have a platform. Okay. If you have an Instagram and all you're putting up is sneakers pictures and you've got 200,000 followers, you need to use your platform. And I always hold everyone accountable for that. Like you have the reach. You have nothing else to do right now. You can't even go to the store to buy. Some places, you know, to buy sneakers. So you need to use your platform as much as you can to do it.
Back off of the Amazon page. Somebody on Instagram is saying preach. So I support
exactly.
But no, I mean, right? Like it is intentional, and it is clear when we think about history, right? Like not just restaurant workers, but Black queer folks also are overrepresented in sort of support positions, those that are not recognized by the IRS or the CARES program, right? So
Exactly.
we're doing hair and makeup and nail technicians and artists and working in other creative capacities. Folks that work in sex industries are not getting paid
Exactly.
at present, right? I'm not gonna talk about the Megan Thee Stallion Beyonce song.
No, but that's what I mean. But it's all of these things that, again, they're, I always say, and I've changed the language I've used. Instead of talking about marginalized populations, I always talk about people who are historically left out of medicine.
Essential work.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's, these are people who are essentially left out of medicine, whereas either as physicians or either as patients, and it's who's advocating for them, who is out there saying, like our LGBTQ population, like how are they going to get tests? We've had situations. I worked the COVID hotlines. I worked the COVID hotlines, and I had a patient who was on medication. He's like, I can't get to my doctor. I can't get a renewal for my prescription. Can you call it in for me? And it's things like that I hear, and I'm just like, damn, like, why can't nobody else hear what I'm hearing right now? But then I look at myself and I say, well, no, you can go and you can talk about this. You can bring this up at your next the next meeting that they're having with all the residents and faculty and things like that, and say, well, what are we doing for this population? Again, don't say, oh, I work in the sickest area of the country. Oh my God, I worked there for 4 years and I'm just, praising because I quote unquote, I went slumming. What are you actually doing? Yeah. You have all of this information. What are you doing with it? Yeah. And it goes back again. And I know I keep going in circles, but this is what it is. It's using your platform.
No, not circles at all. Not
it's using your platform.
You're making important points.
Yeah. And all of you who are on here listening or watching or whatever you're doing, you now have more knowledge than somebody who hasn't watched this and was starting from the same place you were starting from when you started to watch this. Spread this information to your friends and family. Send out a text. Who cares if whatever they say after that? Send it to them. Okay. Yep. If that's the only platform you have, use it. Say, hey, I just listened to this today. This is what I learned.
So let's stay in that space. And acknowledge Dr. Bowtie Todd, my frat brother, said you can't forget about the unseen and unheard. And my classmate Milka reminded me that sex workers are actually intentionally excluded from the Paycheck Protection Program, right? So it's by design. And so my question, if he's talking about domestic childcare workers, disproportionately Black immigrant women, to your point, Dr. Campbell, about our diaspora connections, Iffy and I are gonna continue this conversation on Instagram Live after we tap out, particularly because she and I do a lot of policy work together. And so I want to ask both of you, what are the three, and again, I know these are always hard because there are no silver bullets and it's complicated as we've talked about, right? We could have another conversation just about this in the prison industrial complex or just as this applies in public housing. But what are the three policy recommendations that you all have, the three things that need to happen in order for us to be able to survive COVID? Let's start there and then I'll do my final concluding thing after that.
Well,
I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I heard I think it was a Breakfast Club who had interviewed, Jesus, what's his name? I want to say, is it Van Jones from CNN?
Yep.
Yes, Van Jones.
And he said, yeah, he said, it's so funny because COVID-19 is happening now, and and it's ironic that Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race, but all the things that Bernie Sanders was saying sounded crazy, okay, before COVID-19. But now, if you say them out loud, they make sense. People need to be making more than $15 an hour minimum wage. Makes sense, right? When we're reliant on people who, right now, we are literally have food in our belly right now because of someone who is working a minimum wage job. Okay. The other one was, universal healthcare, free healthcare. Doesn't sound crazy now, does it? No. Nope. Right. And I'm blanking on the third one, but it was just like people saw this as being so liberal and so too socialist. Too socialist, when really it's just being human. And this is showing anything else is that, again, viruses are a part of humanity, right? And how are we treating our humans, right? These things, the fact that we even have to argue them, I think is crazy.
Right.
but this is the reality that we live in. I mean, you look at other countries and what they're doing to support people who are not working. It is, light years ahead of what we're doing. And I really hope that we kind of just like step up, because this is a hard lesson to learn, but it's all out there now. It's all out there.
Mm-hmm.
There was something I was going to mention. I can't remember what it is. I'll come back to it.
I agree with everything Dr. Jeff said. I think, again, having these conversations are important, using your platforms. But I think in a more immediate way, from the medical side of things, some of the things we can do, and like I say, it's about holding each other accountable where you can on your platform, in terms of screening. Somebody mentioned the other day, like democratize screening. Once we do get these tests, make sure that we have programs in place to allow people to get screened. Also, in terms of research, medical professionals, and I've experienced this before, they work on numbers. They work on data. They want to see the paper. They want to see a peer-reviewed journal. We need to be hitting people from that point of it. Those of us who are in it and who have a lot to say, we need to put it on paper, and we need to use the language that our community uses. Okay.
Yeah.
So and I think
that was what I was going to say. That was what I had missed.
Yeah, we need to use the language.
Always help each other out.
Exactly. This is exactly what it is. Again, Dr. Jeff is in the medical field, but she's in a very different way. She's in a very different way than I'm in it. But for me, within the medical community, I know the only way I can really talk about social determinants of health, like I said, I can talk about it from an emotional, personal point of view. But unless I put it to a peer-reviewed journal,
yeah, the
medical community at large is going to be like, all right, whatever. You're just, you're saying this because you're Black, and it affects you. But when you put it to paper and you show people, like, look, these are the actual numbers. This is the research. This is the data this is how I did this, and these are the implications medically, but then these are the implications in other ways and in other parts that we can use. But then also, again, using the language for your community. If I'm in the medical field and I have a bridge to, so I'll just give an example. I gave I spoke to some of my old high school students and some old friends from college about this a couple of weeks back. And we had like a little, Zoom conference where we were talking about it, and these are not people in the medical field. So I use my platform to say, okay, guys, this is what, all the fancy words, like this is what they basically mean. And this is what it means for you in this time where we are. And so I think it's very important that we do that. And again, once you get educated, once you know something, you share it. Whatever Dr. Jeff said today, she's a medical professional. You can go back and spread that word to your family. Spread it to your family.
So let's let that be where we conclude. I will allow both of you to have the last word after I say again, thank you, not only for showing up tonight and giving so much of your brilliance, after having shown up for so many others today. What's the call to action? What's the ask? What do you want people to do after having heard each of you tonight? And I will again just say thank you. Kelly on Instagram said she loved your phrasing around the language that our community uses. Dr. J, a couple of folks have said they've already subscribed to your podcast. Thank you for showing up in the world. Somebody said we should come back and talk about the testing kits. If you come back, I definitely will have you. But again, I want to say thank you. Encourage everybody who's on Zoom to join us on Instagram Live so we can continue. Dr. Campbell, why don't you start? Then Dr. Jeff, you have the final word. What's the call to action?
The call to action is, oh man, it's trying to just think of like a good word for it, but it's basically, the number one thing would be stay at home, but also I think, and I've said it enough, use your platform. That's the most I can say at this point. I can't tell, someone who, has no medical training to be like, oh, well, make sure you explain exactly what COVID is to people. You can't do that, but use your platform, okay? Once you get educated and you get educated from a source that's vetted, share that information. The same way you would share a funny meme on Instagram or on Facebook, share it. someone's going to read it, and it may not change the entire world, but it may make one person make a better decision. So use your platform, whatever that is, however you can. And also, don't think that you don't have a platform. We all have platforms that we use, and make sure you use them appropriately and you spread the information, and you know, as a way to advocate, and also to put these conversations in spaces where they may not normally happen.
I love that. Do something, use your platform. Dr. Jeff, last word goes to you.
Yeah, just to add on to that. So a lot of what Dr. Campbell says is exactly how I use my platform. Like I said, we literally are talking about viruses and swag surf and living your best life. And we use this analogy of a couch surfer, that, you know, viruses are non-living things, and they really just want to go to a house and find a place that has a refrigerator stocked full of food so they can live and make multiple things of themselves. And so you think of each one of these humans as being a new place for the virus to couch surf. They don't want to kill you. They want to stay there, right? And so just using language and making the language accessible. And also, if we make the language accessible, it's not a negative thing. You know, some people are telling me, oh, you're making it too black, blah, 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 blah. I'm not making it too black. I'm making it accessible to a community because it was too white and now it's excluding us.
Right.
So, you know, I couldn't agree more with everything that Dr. Campbell said. Another thing I was gonna say is two things. One, everybody, if you don't do nothing today, before you even subscribe to this podcast, which you should do that too, but before you do that, fill out your census.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Fill it out. It takes 5 minutes. 5 minutes literally is the easiest thing to do, because what that does is it provides resources for a lot of people, especially the people that Dr. Campbell were talking about who don't have access to things. Another thing, we should not have to pay for a vaccine. So apply pressure. We need to be applying a lot of pressure to policymakers, making sure that we come out of this thing good. And also, the last thing I was going to say, you asked about like what's going to happen, where do I see this, how long is this going to take? The short answer is that no one knows, but I will tell you this is going to be around for a long time. People talk about the Spanish flu. Guess what? The 1918, that wasn't when it happened. It actually happened a couple of years before then. That was the second wave. So the second wave was so monumental, it killed so many people, more than the first wave. This is our first wave, guys. It's going to be a long time, but if we take care of each other, we spread that message, we lean in and listen, do lateral reading, transcribe that. If you gotta bring out Meg Thee Stallion and Beyonce to get a message across the board, well, listen, do it, okay?
Do it.
If you gotta do a lot of savage TikToks to stay your ass at home,
I was just gonna say, make sure you're using TikTok. Yes, I have discovered TikTok in all this.
I can't
Make
do
sure
it. Y'all
you're
hipper than I am.
Use
I feel my uncle status because I can't do the ticking and the talking.
I can't.
No, I just watch it. I can't make a TikTok.
But I promote it. Listen, I promote it. I laugh at it. I retweet it. I post it, because even that is encouraging a positive message. And that positive message is you're doing something constructive and you you're doing your part. We have the easiest job is to stay at home, do your census. And with the last 5 minutes that you have, go on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to In Those Genes. Subscribe us. You know, we got Corona updates, and we talk about genetics and ancestry testing and all the things you may want to know. And
It is awesome. Trust me when I say it. Those of you who have joined us on Instagram Live, you have been robbed of being able to see these two brilliant sisters show up over this last hour and a half. But I encourage you to follow them on Instagram. Dr. Linnell Campbell is Dr. Boopsie, DROOPSIE. I love it. And Dr. Janina Jeff is DJ Squared, DJAY, and then the word squared. Please follow them. Please support them. Please take the knowledge that they've shared tonight and share with other sisters. Hear me when I say thank you. I'm going to follow up and find ways to continue to support all of what you're doing.
Thank you.
Hear me when I say thank you for blessing us on tonight.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to leave the chat up for a little while longer. At Gina and Stem Noir. We'll also share the link to the t-shirt as well. So I encourage everybody on here to come join me on Instagram at Mr. David Johns. I'm gonna grab a charger. We'll continue. Thank you to both of you. I hope you have an amazing night.
All right. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everybody for joining.
Bye.